And we're live.
Hi, Diana.
Hey, Linda. So good to see you. And already I can see a whole bunch of people are waiting for us. Yay! So lovely to see everybody. And actually, if everybody would enter where you're watching us from, we'd love to know, because it's kind of fun to have our big harp community all over the world. Yeah. And Linda, where are you?
I'm in Lawton, Oklahoma.
Lawton, Oklahoma. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm here in Berkeley, California. And I am very proud to say that Linda is one of my beloved students and a fine practitioner of the Bright Knowledge System. So I thought you would be the perfect person to talk to today about our topic, which is memorization. So we'll get into that in just a second. So we have, hey, Lorna. We have Jane from Austin, Wisconsin, Texas, New York City. Very cool. So a lot of you know that I use sort of a 5-step system. Let me give you a visual on that. Mm-hmm. So on the outer rim are these 5 steps that people go through in a linear way. And then in the middle are these 5 elements that happen all the time. And one of them is learning, as you can see. And learning is an element we will talk about today. So in learning, a major, major factor with that is memorization. And we're going to talk about what does memorization, actually mean. So inside of those 5 elements that I just mentioned, so the 5 elements are inside here. We have artistry. We talked about that with destiny, technique, inspiration, community, and learning that we're talking about today. These 5 elements have to be present for every practice, or at least touched upon on a super regular basis. Now, if you want to know which element you're a little bit lacking in, we can actually give you a quiz right here. So it's harpcirclequiz.com. Go there and answer the questions, and you will actually get to find out which of the 5 elements you need a little bit more support on right now. So I think, Linda, you took this quiz, right?
I did.
What was your result at the moment?
Technique.
So I've got to focus on technique a little bit right now. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Or to pay attention. That's one of the things that I have discovered as I have practiced is I'll talk about this, in more detail, but when I am repeating it, this time I'm going to really pay attention to my technique as I do this little part. This time I'm really going to listen for my artistry, so that by the time I have finished that little piece, I hopefully have gone through the cycle. But sometimes, of course, I kind of hit a snag and forget about it all. But the tools are there. The tools are available and really make a difference.
Cool. And we'll talk a lot more about that today. So yeah, everybody, you can head on over to harpcirclequiz.com and take your quiz. You will get your answer and solutions to your answer as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So today we'll be talking about the 3 types of musical memory that you can control. So I want to explain a little bit what I mean by that. So before we even jump into it, actually, I'd love to know people's experiences of memorization. How are you doing with your musical memorization? Does it feel solid? Is it pretty easy to do? Do you have a system for doing it? Or is memorization just a bit of a mystery to you, sort of touch and go, and you don't know how to hold on to it except to just play your piece over and over again? So let us know in the comments. And meanwhile, I'd love to say something kind of controversial. Muscle memory is not memory. It's actually a habit. Okay, most of us rely on muscle memory. And what muscle memory is just the feeling of playing the song. So normally how we develop our muscle memory is we practice the song, hundreds of times, and eventually we know it. Now, what happens is then we go to our lesson and suddenly we can't play it. Or we get on stage and we can't play it. And you're like, I did memorize this. You know, why is it all falling apart now? And this is the reason why muscle memory is not actually a type of memory. It's just a habit. And it comes from a place very close to your brainstem. And you can't really access it consciously. So I think we've all had that, you know, horrifying experience of being on stage, hitting a memory lapse, and not being able to consciously recall what to do. The only thing you really could do is basically to start all over again, right, and get a running jump because you're trying to recreate that habit. So muscle memory, you know, I sound like I give it a bad rap. And that's because so many people rely on it and it kind of lets them down on stage. But of course, we actually do need muscle memory and we need it in order to play fluently, right? To have that beautiful flow in our playing. But the muscle memory will come no matter what, you know, if we play enough. So I'm not too concerned about it. So I don't even talk about muscle memory when I'm teaching. And instead, I talk about the 3 types of memorization. Instead, the 3 types of memorization that you can actually consciously control. Okay. So let's see. Oh, we have Barbara on. We've got, wow, we have a lot of great comments. Yay. Okay, yes, some people have had some major problems with memorization. Right, so it's a very common thing. So Linda, can you tell us a little bit about your experience of memorization before you started working on these 3 types of memorization we're going to go into together?
You know, I think I really depended on repetition, that if I repeated it enough, if I did that measure or that phrase, and, you know, I think that was my system, was, you know, you repeat it, surely you're going to incorporate it. And so memorization was not, memorizing was not something that I had done very well. And as I was listening to you talk and also seeing some of the comments, it just became really clear to me that, you know, just sitting and playing the measure or those notes is not really learning it. You've got to be engaged. You know, so often I might have been writing my grocery list or, you know, paying attention to the birds flying outside or whatever. And now I'm more committed to really being focused what I am doing. You know, one of the things Destiny said in her interview was a new piece, she spends 10 minutes each day. 10 minutes, you know, not hours, 10 minutes. And that's really valuable. Focus on that 10 minutes and then basically you're done. But when I focused for 10 minutes, usually I don't want to be done because it's satisfying and it's fulfilling, which is what we're going to be getting into next month. But yeah. Let me hear it better. Let me incorporate it. You know, when it's beautiful and I've got it, I want to play it again and be successful.
Right. Yeah. So memorization is actually really motivating, I would say, you know, in many ways. Let's hear from Nicole. She says, I struggle with memorization. It takes a long time to memorize a piece, but now I'm really breaking things down, singing the bass line, the melody, and listening to the song when I'm away from the harp. This is proving very helpful. Okay, so Linda, you know, you'll recognize a lot of things in what Nicole is saying that we're going to talk about today, right? That really improve our memorization. Yeah, and I really appreciate the way you're emphasizing how deliberate memorization is, that it's not simply just playing the piece over and over again. Because just to say it one more time, you know, that's simply muscle memory. It's a type of habit. It is not actually in your active recall. You can't actually bring it up. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, a lot of great comments coming by, but let's jump in with this. Now, Linda, let me put you on the spot.
Okay.
What is the first type of musical memory that we have to focus on, the one that we really want to bolster before we start working on the other two? What's the first one?
The oral. You need to know what it sounds like.
Thank you.
And that was one of the comments Nicole made, I believe, is that she listens to it away from the harp. That way you have some idea of what it's really going to be sounding like, or what you want it to sound like, whether you're on or off or not. So yes, listening to the piece in all different kinds of ways and places, and YouTube is just fantastic for having all kinds of stimulation and different versions that you can in terms of being able to make the piece your own. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. By listening to different versions of the same piece, you can actually hear different ideas. You're basically increasing your vocabulary, your musical vocabulary. Music is a language just like speaking. And just the same with speaking, we can't actually say things unless we actually know that word in our head beforehand. Same thing with music. So with the piece that we're playing, we actually want to know on a very, very deep level what it sounds like beginning to end, including the bass, including all the internal voices, not just the melody. We actually want to know our piece as it sounds away from the harp. So, Linda, you travel a lot. And this is something you can practice away from your harp, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Was visiting family in Mississippi last week. And, I would play on their piano with me. But, if I didn't remember exactly what this part sounded like, okay, well, let me play it and then to hear it in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one way for me to tell whether I have actually memorized a piece auditorily is to do it from beginning to end. If there are any gaps, then I know that it's actually not deeply in my memory, and I will need to go back to that certain spot and listen to it more and really integrate it, into my psyche. And just as you were saying, Linda, that actually makes you so much more musically involved in the piece, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about this in a bit too, but the more ways you engage, the deeper you get with your piece. Now, I have not been years and years. I will confess to our harp circle friends that it was your invitation to do a practice plan that really got me in gear. And so we're talking maybe 6-8 weeks ago that I've been really serious about, putting this into practice. And I have been amazed at how successful I have been. I have been surprised that I have so much memorized of the pieces that I'm wanting to work on right now.
Yeah, it really speeds things along to develop the auditory memory, because you're actually working off of something that's very, very clear. You know what you're looking for, rather than second guessing yourself. You're playing something and you're like, I actually don't know if that's right or not. Yeah. So, auditory memory for me is like a big pleasure to practice, because it's dealing with the sound, and that's what we do at the harp. It's all about the sound, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one of the things that why we play the harp is for that beautiful, beautiful sound, and to be able to be engaged in what I sound like as opposed to what am I supposed to be playing is wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. Because we want to keep motivation going, right? At first, it's easy to be motivated, because it's all new. And then as the years go by, Linda, you've played the harp how long now?
It's been almost 17 years.
Yeah, almost 17 years. Yeah. And so, we want to find ways to keep that motivation going through the years, and this deep concentration on the auditory. So ways to practice auditory is listen to your song, listen to different versions of it, sing it out loud, sing it in your head. There are just so many ways to practice that auditory memory and get a big old musical vocabulary through it. Yeah. So I always start with that because that's the basis that everything else comes off of. Okay. So let's move on to the next layer of the musical memory. Now, auditory is first, but what is the second? Where do we go second?
Analytical.
Very good. Yahoo!
Well, and I must be honest with you, I have my it's not my cheat sheet, but you know, you provided the, provided this for us, and I have this in my practice notebook to remind myself, you know, we've talked about this in other arenas, but you know, you go from the known to the unknown.
Yes.
The more, as long as I need to have these reminders that I'm not doing it automatically, you know, I've got some little, they're not cheat sheets, they're just triggers, you know, reminders until I have it incorporated. But yeah. But the next is analytical.
Analytical. So this is where we're using music theory. So a lot of times people think music theory is not related to actually playing. But by understanding music theory, we get to see the architecture behind the music. And what it does, as Anne says right there, is it shows patterns. It reveals patterns. It takes a huge amount of information and congeals it into a manageable amount instead. So let's see what else Anne says here. By looking at the page and seeing the patterns in the notes, quite mathematical and deliberately analytical, yes, even highlighting where the same note recurs. And of course, it's important to know what it sounds like by having heard it played well. Yes, so we have to have the auditory first. Then we get into the analytical. So the analytical memory, is where you're looking at your theory. You're saying, you know, what key am I in? I remember, you know, before I used this memorization system, I actually relied on muscle memory a huge amount. It scares me how much I did that, right? Oh, God. And I could play incredibly complicated piano pieces because at the time I was a classical pianist, but I was doing it by muscle memory. I actually would oftentimes not really even know what key I was in, you know, and that just leaves you prey to just all sorts of horrible things happening because you kind of don't know what you're doing. You know, you may know how it sounds, so the auditory is there, which is a good thing. But without the analytical to back it up, you don't really have the architecture, the bones of the song in your mind. Now, at first, when we look at the analytical, Linda, so when we went through working in small chunks and really identifying, you know, what key are we in, what form are we using, you know, what chords are we using? How did it feel at first when you started looking at it that way?
I've always been very, very interested and curious in, you know, patterns are, what the architecture is. But I'll be honest with you, I look at it for maybe a line to really get to know that line as opposed to the whole. I mean, it's like I need to pay a little attention to the trees and leaves before I look at the whole forest. And that may be kind of backwards, but it's just to be able to analyze it and to look for patterns and do they repeat and have I played that, and you know, what's the chord progression. I mean, that's just kind of like laying down the framework and then putting in the bricks on top of it. It's just a foundation for whatever you're playing.
And the more that you do it, I mean, it's amazing, right? How the same patterns keep revealing themselves, even throughout different genres, right? Totally different types of song. You'll find 1, 4, 5 very often, right? And, you know, it's not infinite. It's not, I mean, music is infinitely creative, but it's not like there are infinite options in terms of every song, unless it's absolutely, experimental new music, avant-garde. then it could be, yeah. But for all the effort you make initially with your analyzation and figuring out things like keys and what types of chord progression you're dealing with, it pays off big. It pays off so big because you're going to find the same thing happening down the road in another song. It builds and builds so that, eventually you're able to memorize very fast because you're able to congeal a lot of information into patterns quickly. And you're like, oh, there's that pattern again. Yeah. One of my favorite examples with that is, I was really struggling learning a page of a Beethoven sonata. And I was just dragging on. I just couldn't memorize it. I was like, what's going on? I thought, take my own advice, analyze it. And I did. The entire page, I'm not kidding, was 1 and 5. He was only using 2 chords. Of course, he was using them in super inventive ways. He's Beethoven. But it was still 2 chords. And suddenly it's like, it's like the Matrix. I could see what was happening behind what looked like, ants on a page.
And also for me to look at, to identify the chord inversions, this may look more complicated than it really is. It's just a first inversion. And so to be able, and if I duplicate my music out, because that's probably going to happen again, and they'll be, can be very consistent.
Yeah, great. So you exactly. So we have actually Keith. Hello, my friend Keith. Keith is a friend and tango dancer, and I recently spent some time in Buenos Aires with him. We had a great old time dancing a tango. Let's see what he says. He plays flamenco guitar. This analytical memory in music appears to me like a lecturer making an outline of a long speech as a quick reference. Yes. Wow. Yeah. So, what seems like, whoa, a massive information, you're like, here are the cliff notes. I like that, Keith. That's really good. Yeah. Lorna says, I see the musical patterns in geometric shapes as well, triangles, squares, circles, etc. Yes. Now, this is reminding me of someone in our harp circle who actually color codes the different chords. Did you remember seeing that one, Linda? It was
I did. Yeah.
So all the 1 chords, all the tonic chords, she colored in that measure a certain color, and then the 4 and the 5 chords had their colors. And suddenly the page was mostly just those 3 colors, and so much more manageable. Yeah. So, figure out what works for you in terms of ways of analyzing. So if you decide to go with, triangles, squares, circles, all of this sort of stuff, I think that is absolutely appropriate. Yeah. And it's actually starting to move a little bit into our next type of memory. So we'll talk about that in just a sec. Oh, I think Linda just fell off, but she'll come back in a second. So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys. What gets sparked for you so far when you're looking in this type of musical memory, when you're thinking about developing your auditory memory more, and then you're also thinking about developing your analytical memory more? Does it make you feel empowered, or does it make you feel like, oh, this is going to be a lot of extra work? Because I'll tell you, for me, it really has saved a lot of time. And what I've been able to do is really memorize stuff incredibly fast. Now, that's not because I have a good memory necessarily. It's because I sort of trained these muscles in. And I've done this with a lot of other harpists as well, shared this method with them. And it's really, I've seen it work. And not only that, of course, you memorize faster and all that, and more solid, and you're more confident on stage because you know what you're doing. But, you just enjoy music more. It's more fascinating, and there's more to hold on to. So Anne is saying, how do the geometric shapes thing work? So Lorna, we've got some questions for you. Can can you say more about the geometric shapes that you use for your analyzation? And then Linda says, I use colors because my eyes don't track music as well. Yeah. Start learning, what is the system for you that you are thinking of music in intellectually? Like, what do you conceive of music as? And I love these kind of synesthetic approaches where you have basically colors being put into the scene, where you have shapes. It's not simply about the sound. Okay, cool. So I think Lorna is starting to answer. Very cool. I love this cross conversation. Yeah. Okay, so our very last type of memory that I want to talk about today with you, and I think there's been a little bit of touching upon it already. So that is the kinetic memory. So that's physically how you're moving. It's sort of the dance of the hands, how your hands are actually interfacing with each other on a very conscious level. I also call this air harp. I'll explain more about that in just a second. Now, with kinetic memory, this is different than muscle memory. The difference is kinetic memory is conscious. You actually can predict what you're going to do next. And I came across the importance of this from that very disconcerting experience that you can have either in lessons or in a performance where you're playing and you're suddenly like, oh my God, is that what my hands look like? And you're playing everything right, everything's fine. But the thing is, it's not conscious or familiar, and it just freaks you out completely. So with air harp, what you're actually doing is you're away from the harp. You're trying to actually break that muscle memory, and you will practice watching how the hands actually dance with each other. So for example, say I'm doing Twinkle Twinkle, right? And so it's like 3, 3, 1, 1, dun, 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 dun. Okay, so here I am, and I know it goes dun, dun, bum, bum. So I have that much going. Now what happens on the left hand? Maybe the chord happens right away. Bum, bum, bum. So I know that it's not going to happen with the thumb. It happens with 3. Dun, 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 dun. So Jillian is saying, does that mean we can have air harp championships too now? Yeah, guys, have you seen the air guitar championships? And people take this very seriously. I mean, they really, really get into it. So yeah, it could happen. It could happen. So with the air harp, this is something you can also practice away from the harp. So actually all of these types of memory, you can practice wherever. So it can be a super efficient way to really bump up your learning, because we are talking about the essential element of learning today. You can bump up your learning because you're not relying simply, hey there, Linda, you're back. I'm talking about the kinetic memory.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. And so what's happening, with the kinetic memory and all those 3 types of memory is that because you can practice them away from the harp, you can actually do 5 minutes here when you're stuck in traffic. You can do 5 minutes there, when you're waiting for somebody, because we tend to run out of time for practice, right? It's a struggle for almost everybody. And by having these little micro times when we're working on our memorization, and it can be done away from the harp, it's really a powerful thing. Mm-hmm. And you've done quite a bit of that on the road, haven't you, Linda?
On the road, and I find there's one place in particular in one of my songs that I just really struggled with learning, and I'm so committed to kinetic memory. And every time I play it, I'm just, one of the things I'd say in my head, because I had to do it over and over again. Okay, the thumb is on the D and the thumb is on the G, and they played at the same time. Okay, and when I play the piece, I'm always there. It worked. I finally got it, you know.
It absolutely
But
works.
yes, it absolutely works. I mean, it's almost magical.
Yeah,
Almost.
it locks it in such a
Yeah.
deep
Yeah.
way. And yet, you know, it doesn't lock you in, because
Right.
even though I will commit things to kinetic memory, because I'm so aware of what I'm doing, I can also switch things up and not get freaked out, because I consciously know what variation I did, or, you know, perhaps I put the chord on the next beat or something like that, but I know I did it. And it's not like I'm suddenly going to get lost. You know, it's that I actually know what I did and I can keep track. So in that way, you can actually end up improvising more, doing variations more, and just getting a lot more artistic freedom as well.
Well, you are freer. I mean, I believe you are freer because you've got that security of knowing where your hands are going. And Diana, every single time you talk about kinetic memory, you are demonstrating it, and you know that has been a very helpful thing to me as I've begun to learn to work with kinetic memory, because that just seems so, you know, air harp just seems so weird. You know, if my harp is here, why don't I use it? But to really get it into my fingers without having to worry about or think about what it sounds like, because air harp sounds beautiful, right? But just that visual has been very helpful to me to okay, what do my hands look like when I am trying to do this particular part, and to really focus on what my hands look like, even when they're on the harp as well as when they're off the harp.
Yeah, thank you. So you know, you're quite right. There is a crossover to the visual memory when we're talking about the kinetic. I do talk about it from the air harp perspective, because, you know, I want to try and congeal things into a manageable chunk. And my main focus is that people actually go ahead and do the physical movements. So I call it kinetic, but the fact is it's extremely visual. You know, even if it's just visual in your mind's eye. Like sometimes I could lie in bed and I'm kind of like this with my fingers, but in my mind's eye, I am seeing my fingers on the harp. Yeah. And it just creates such tremendous confidence when you do that, you know. And that's what this is all about. You know, with this memorization, you feel more confident. You trust yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have been really surprised. And again, I've really committed to this maybe for the last 6 to 8 weeks. But to pick up another piece of music, it's easier. I mean, I'm more familiar with it even before I begin it, even just in sight reading, because I can't really explain it other than I've focused on the pieces that I'm trying to learn, and some of that information is transferring to something new. I can't identify it and talk about it, but I know it's real.
Well, definitely. I mean, your whole level of musicianship bumps up dramatically when you do this very conscious type of memorization, and you get great dividends from it.
Well, it's satisfying. You know, when you play something beautifully, it is satisfying. I have been the product is the most important thing. You start it and you finish it, and so you have a package. That's not my goal right now. My goal is to have a beautiful practice session, and when I finish the piece, right now I don't have deadlines, but when I finish the piece, then it will be a beautiful presentation, as opposed to something that I've thrown together in order to finish it up. But it's, you know, taking the time makes all the difference in the world, and in terms of my enjoyment, but also how beautiful it sounds.
I love that. I love that. Again, you know, just hugely motivating to in our practice. You know, practice becomes interesting. It becomes compelling. You know, we have something we can focus on that's interesting, you know, rather than I'm just on this treadmill hoping this song will somehow get better, you know. And that's a very slow process if we do it that way. But if we do it this way with these 3 types of memorization, in the end, you learn much faster. It's true, it's an investment at the beginning, you know, especially in the analytical aspect, when you're starting to bump up your theory knowledge, you know, beef that up. That can be a little bit of a time investment, but wow, down the road, you just, you save so much time. And then in the meantime, you have a better practice and far more confidence when you're performing. You know, I mean, I feel a major culprit of performance anxiety is actually not knowing the song. It's actually not memorized.
And you know, there's some pieces that I am working on that I don't quite have totally memorized, and I want to totally memorize them. But the familiarity, the time that I have spent in learning those small chunks, it's almost like I look at my music and I just need the hint of what comes next, as opposed to have to, you know, look at the whole. You know, it's kind of like a glimpse, and then I'm back on. Such a huge difference. Such a huge difference.
Yeah, you have so much more to hold on to if something goes wrong. And the fact is, you know, when we perform, pretty much every time, something will go wrong. You know, even if it's, yeah.
If you know that if you really know your piece well, then you can improvise. You know what comes next. I mean, you may have goofed it right here and missed something, but you know what you have some options of where you go. You're not just stranded there.
It's not catastrophic.
No, it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be because you know what's coming next, and you know how to get out of that situation or that challenge. You know, if you know the chord progression, then you know what's supposed to come next, and you know what notes are in that, and you know, make it as simple as possible and move on.
Exactly. So we have some comments. So Donna is here. If you're learning a piece you're familiar with, you're not trying to figure out what it sounds like while you're trying to figure out how to play it. Quite right, Donna. So this is why I put auditory memory as the biggest deal of all. We really want to have our auditory memory down before we start playing. Now, what does that mean for people who are improvising? We're still going to have an auditory sense of what we're going to be playing. We still want to have a picture in mind of what we're trying to communicate. And so we're going to be really, really clear on what our story is, what our message is with that song. We'll probably have in mind at least what key or mode that we're working in, and perhaps progression. Or so the auditory can be quite freeform. Sometimes it needs to be, you know. So it's not always note for note. And then Gloria is saying, auditory memorization resonates with me more. But how do you build a big repertoire if you have to memorize everything? I play primarily from lead sheets and can improvise to a certain extent using different chord inversions, but still can't imagine committing all of my music to memory. And there's so much more music and so little time. That's a great question, Gloria. I would say this is really for pieces that you are planning on keeping in your repertoire for all time. You know, it doesn't have to happen for every single piece you play, but the fact is, the more you do this memorization, you would be amazed at actually how much you can memorize. I mean, I can play, if I do background music, I don't like to take my big book and it's, you know, page turning and so on. And so I can actually play about 4 hours by memory at this point. And I could play more if I decided to throw in some improv. So Gloria, I think you would be surprised actually about how much you can play by memory. And since you are playing from lead sheets and improvising, then basically what you'll have in your memory is going to be the melody line and the chord progression, and then it's up to you what you do with it. I mean, that's the extent to which you have to memorize it. You don't have to memorize every single note. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, try it out. And with auditory memorization being the one that resonates with people the most, yeah, absolutely. And it's the most fun one, and it's the one that we start with because it is all about the sound in the first place. So listening to other musicians, listening to yourself. Really, I count this as practice. My students know this. I say, if you are listening to something, you are practicing. So it's not, sort of just a luxury or something to be done at a different time. It can be part of your practice. So what else do I want to say to you? I had something on the tip of my tongue. It'll come back in a second. Yeah. So just to reiterate, muscle memory again, I just can't say it enough. It's not really a type of memory. So for those of you, and probably it's the vast majority of us, who have had experiences where you have performed or beaten a lesson and you just had unbelievable memory slips, I think it was most likely because you were relying on muscle memory, and that's simply a type of habit. Don't feel bad about it. It doesn't mean you have a bad memory, because actually you weren't using your memory. You were using a habit. So I just want to empower you with that. And then to go through our list, auditory, number 1. So the hearing, listening aspect. And then the analytical. So this is where theory becomes useful. Theory becomes not theory, it becomes reality. And then the final one is kinetic memory. So this is where you actually physically will sit down. Let me remove the bar so that you can see my hands. And you literally are hearing the song in your head. You could sing it out loud if you like. And moving your fingers, noticing how they're dancing together. Literally, what is the pattern? And bonus points if you can do this very slowly, because that's breaking the muscle memory even more. And, there are a lot of stories, I don't know how true they are, of, pianists being called in at the last second to play a concerto, and they didn't know it. They were replacing another pianist, and they would learn it on the train or something simply by kinetic memory, reading the score, moving, then watching their hands, because in the end they have to play it by memory. So it's actually a very deep type of memory, and once you have all 3 of those in, wow, you have those songs in your repertoire pretty much forever. So I would love to hear from any of you about what your thoughts are from memorization. And Linda says, I find I can learn quicker and remember longer if I switch hands and play the harp left-handed instead of from a right-handed position. Yeah. So again, when you're breaking the muscle memory and doing things very consciously, so now you've reversed hands, you're having to think about it in a different way. So this, Linda, I feel like is getting you outside of the muscle memory, and that you are having to actually be more analytical in terms of what you're really doing. So it's interesting that you learn quicker and remember longer, even though you've taken an extra step. Say, an extra step is going to slow me down. Not necessarily at all. It can oftentimes speed things up. And so Donna is saying, so kinetic memory is not muscle memory. No. Do you want to take that one, Linda? And explain why kinetic memory is not muscle memory?
Because, and I don't have the scientific brain explanation, but I mean, you are engaged in so many ways with kinetic memory. I mean, it's air harp. It is, how does it feel and look on the harp? How does it I mean, the sound is part of that as well. They all go together. And so it's integrating a whole bunch of things I mean, it didn't come easy for me. I mean, it didn't come automatic. You know, playing and doing it over and over and over again seemed to be the way to do it. But the physical, and in fact, that's one of the things that got me aware of the value of playing the harp is that physical experience of actually playing the harp. The more you do that and feel it in your muscles. I mean, it's not that your muscles you're relying on your head muscle. It's not necessarily your finger muscles, but that in the relationship. I love the way you talk about it, you talk about it as the dance between the hands. How does this hand relate to that one? Not necessarily whose turn is it to play, but how do they play together? And I mean, to look at it as a dance has been very enlightening. I mean, it's kind of my hands playing with one another, taking turns and playing together kind of thing. I mean, it's that simple. And then it becomes fun, I think, when I look at it in that way.
So who knew that memorization was fun? It is.
It's satisfying. It's satisfying when, I mean, just that first measure, I did it, add another measure to it. Well, that one worked too. And this is how they go together. I mean, it's very, very simple, but it works. And, and one of the things that I have discovered is that I really can't go beyond, I've tried this a couple of times. Oh, surely I can do two chunks. And of course the chunks are going to be different sizes depending on what the piece is. One of the pieces that I'm working on, my chunk for the day may only be one note, may only be one beat, because that's just all that I can incorporate with what I've learned before. To go on is more than I can do. And then other parts in that piece, I can do, maybe two measures at a time, because it's a pattern that I've already experienced and it's familiar, and we're doing it again. Maybe in a slightly different inversion, but it's the same melody and with a little bit different in the bass. But I've experienced that, and so I've got that pattern. It's known, and so I can do a little bit more of that. But did that come anywhere close to answering the question that you started out with?
I love it. I love it.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about how, kinetic memory is very conscious. Muscle memory is simply a habit.
Yes.
And, when muscle memory fails, you can't recover.
Yeah.
But when kinetic memory, you have a stumble, you can get back on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there are so many other benefits that you were talking about, Linda, in that it's much more in your body. You embody the song more. You can bring more of your body's wisdom to the song. There are so many, many layers to this. We're sort of just scratching the surface here with this overview. But we want to just introduce people to the idea, that it's possible for you to memorize. If you've had memory lapses in the past, it does not mean you have a bad memory. And that there's also sort of an order of operations with our memory. We start with the auditory, then we do the analytical, because we want to analyze it. It'll include fingering before we put it into kinetic memory, because it's hard if you put the wrong fingering, an inconvenient fingering into kinetic memory, it's kind of hard to wipe that out. You have to basically starve that neural pathway, to stop it from firing the same old way. Yeah. And you're bringing up some more advanced topics as well. We don't have time to go into them here today, but the idea of moving things from short-term memory to long-term memory, we can really only hold something like 5 to 9 pieces of information in our short-term memory at the same time. And when you think about music, I mean, you could have 3 notes on the left hand. You can have a 4-note run on the right hand. That's already 7. And we're not even talking about fingering. We're not even talking about dynamics, key, all that. I mean, music is so dense. There's so much information. So So what you want to do is take these very small chunks, put them into a pattern by analyzing them, and then you can basically move that pattern into one piece of information in long-term memory. So that's a little bit beyond what we're talking about today, but just to show people a little bit about, what memorization actually does entail. So
Diana, when you were talking previously, it made me think, when I have this, when I have my piece so well understood, that if I do make a mistake, I don't panic, because I know where I can go from there. Whereas if I'm just relying on muscle memory, I'm lost.
Yeah, anything could happen, right? Anything's a possibility because you actually don't know where you are. Yeah. We've all had that experience, and I just want to assure people it's so common, and it's definitely not that you have a bad memory. So let's see what Ginny says. My teacher recommends that after I know a piece, I start playing it from the end or the middle so that I can pick up the song if I have a memory lapse. Yeah, that's a nice tip. Sometimes what I'll do is I have starting points. And I remember when I was preparing for my master's degree recital on piano, so classical piano, my alter ego, I had starting points for each piece, and God, there could be a lot. I mean, up to 40 starting points. And my teacher literally would say, 17. And I would play it. Or he would say 25, and I could do it. And although that sounds like, wow, that's an incredible feat of memory, it was more easy to do than I thought. And it gave me an incredible amount of confidence to know that just out of thin air, I could go to a certain section. See what Donna says. Also, by starting at the end, you finish up stronger instead of weaker because you've done the beginning many more times than the end. Yeah, this happens all the time, right? That we practice the beginning a million times, but then the end gets proportionally like a third as much practice time. And then we wonder why we don't know the ending so well. So yeah, sometimes you can assure yourself of giving equal practice time by actually starting further towards the end. Things like that. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Well, today we have been talking about the 3 types of musical memory, and we have been here with Linda Ashton. Yay, in Lawton, Oklahoma. So pleased to have you here because you're someone, who has walked this talk. You've actually seen the difference of trying to learn things in sort of a, muscle memory fashion, and instead turning things around to a more conscious type of memory. Yeah.
I mean, it's really made all the difference. I'm loving playing. And I know that I can do it. This truly has given me more confidence. And so it's great.
I love it. So we have a nice comment here from Laurel. It's a big, long one, so I encourage people to read it in the comments, because if I put it on the screen, I think it might not fit. But thank you, Laurel. This is wonderful. We're sharing a lot of wisdom here, and I really encourage people to, share their experiences, share your tips. It makes a big difference to people's lives. They're playing with more joy, memorizing better, and perhaps even staying with the harp rather than giving it up in frustration. You don't have to. So let me remind you again about the little quiz that you can take at harpcirclequiz.com, and that will reveal to you which of the 5 essential elements, hand in the camera, 5 essential elements that you need to support a little bit more in your practice. It could be artistry, technique, community, inspiration, or learning. And learning, in this case, we're talking about memorization, is about how do we actually learn? What's the science of learning? How do we know that people learn consistently well? And memorization is a huge part of learning. There are many other aspects too, but critical are these 3 aspects of musical memory that you can control. So
Mm-hmm.
if you guys found this useful, oh, thank you, Lorna. If you guys found this useful, please share it with your friends so that they can also learn about these 3 types of musical memory. And be sure to take the quiz and like and subscribe to us, because we have more of these coming up. And I'm just so happy to be here with you, Linda. It's so fun, I have to say.
My delight. Thank you for inviting me.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, I mean, I've really witnessed your confidence growing as you work this way, and not only your confidence. What makes me even happier is is your joy in playing increasing. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Gloria. So sweet. Yeah. So I'm glad that you all had a chance to meet my wonderful Linda. And yay! And so yeah, let's sign off for now. Guys, you might also want to subscribe to the it's called Diana Rowan Bright Knowledge Academy Facebook page, because if you subscribe, if you like it, then you get automatic notifications about any upcoming Facebook Lives. And you can also do that on the Virtual Harp Summit Facebook page. You just hit like, and then you'll get these notifications. Jan says, thank you both. It's fun to co-teach with you, Linda, I gotta say.
Loved it.
We'll approach this issue with more confidence and direction. Super. And Arave says, thank you. I felt discouraged, but this gives me hope. Good. Yeah, Arave, you can do this. You can absolutely do this. I used to think I had a bad memory. And actually, when as you guys, many of you guys know, I gave up music because I had performance anxiety so badly. And when I finally came back, I came to a teacher and I said, can you help me? And she's like, yes, I can. First thing she had me do was memorize. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I can't do it. She's like, you have to do it. You have to do it to get over your anxiety. And then I actually found out, hey, I'm fine. And in the end, I was able to play concerts. And again, I want to remind you guys that I had come from a place of having, terrible memory lapses, and also feeling that, my memory wasn't good. So you absolutely can have a great memory. And Joni says, thank you both. It's just wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I'm learning every day. Yeah, we all are. We're all learning from each other here. Yeah, I so appreciate it. And thank you, Jillian. Jillian is sharing the quiz again. And so again, it identifies which element you need to support more. And it also sends you an email with some actions you can take to support that missing element. So, okay, everybody, it's been so fun. And see you all again. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Diana.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jillian, behind the scenes. Bye.